All right, so thus far, I don't think I've said anything on this channel that would really polarize my audience, but today might be that day. So buckle up, this is my review of the Pentax Q7. This is my entire Pentax Q system. So let me just tell you a little bit about what's in this kit. It starts off with the Pentax Q7, the body itself. Look at that tiny, tiny sensor. It is literally like the cutest camera I've ever seen, and I have it with the smallest lens they made for it. This is the 07 mount shield lens. It's a fixed focus, fixed aperture, Holga effect lens, essentially. But I mean, this thing is, I didn't even realize how small it was until I actually bought it. So this is the number one lens. This is the prime lens. It's like the 01 standard prime it's called. It's a 47 millimeter equivalent focal length. Number two is a standard zoom. And this gives you an equivalent of 23 to 83 in 35 millimeter focal length standard. And then number three is this fish eye. I mean, like, this is the smallest little fish eye lens. It gives a focal length equivalent of 18 millimeters, and you can actually manually focus it. You can't autofocus it, so you have to manually focus it. But it has a near far scale on it, and that's about as good as it gets. And then number four gets into their toy series lens. So this is the toy wide lens, and that gives a focal equivalent of 35 millimeter. It does have a focus ring on this as well. The five toy lens. This is the telephoto toy lens. It's super tiny. I mean, like, just so tiny. And again, you cannot autofocus it. And then the number 6 lens, it's the telephoto lens. So this tiny little lens gets you a focal range of 83 millimeters to 249 millimeters in 35 terms. So this is the entire form factor with that telephoto lens on it, getting you up to 250 millimeters essentially. So pretty rad. This particular model was the third in a lineup of 4 Q models. Backside illuminated CMOS sensor, 12.4 megapixels, interchangeable lenses. Like, outside of maybe the Panasonic GM lines, like the GM5 and the GM1, this is, and maybe it still is, the smallest interchangeable system. So it does have video. It has 1080, and I think it goes like 24 frames per second. But like, if you've watched this channel for any period of time, you probably know I'm not going to get into the video specs for these older cameras, but like, obviously this is a little bit later in the lineup of cameras compared to like my 2004 models. So it does have video. A lot of my cameras do not even have it as an option. I will put in a sample of the video here. All right, here's a backwards walk and talk test because I thought the sunlight might be too hard to walk against. It's just like not very good. It goes up to ISO 12,800. Again, it's on paper. I would not push it. I don't know. I think 3,200 is probably fine. And then it gets kind of messy from there. I fit this whole system with the charger in this little case, and I can stick it in my bag or my suitcase and travel and like literally have everything covered. And that's pretty awesome. Then there's also the grip. So even though it's a very small camera, you would think this would be like very uncomfortable ergonomically. It's actually really well constructed for the hand. So the grip is actually very nice to hold. And the buttons are small, but they have a good tactility, if that's a word, tactileness to them. And all of the controls you could really want are here. There is a little bit of a, it has a rotating wheel on top. It has a mode dial over here. Then you have a series of buttons back here that you can control, and then you have a quick menu. All of those things are fantastic. You can do full manual on this, which is wonderful. It's one of the many things that I really was attracted to when I bought this. It also has like these custom settings that you can set up with this little dial on the front, which is just kind of cute and fun. And it has a flash. I always do the flash thing because I love these little flashes, but this one is just unique. Like, look at that. It has an ND filter built in. I've mentioned this on previous videos with cameras that have this, but what a brilliant feature. So if you want to use that prime, which goes down to 1.9 on an f-stop, you can just open it wide up. This will go up to a 2,000th of a second, but then you add the ND filter on it and you just get a little bit more, you know, usage out of it, or mileage from the camera itself if you want to shoot wide open. Now 1.9 on a 4.6 crop sensor is obviously not going to be extremely shallow depth of field, so just, you know that it's a small sensor camera at the end of the day. It has RAW and JPEG, and the RAW files are DNGs, which I love because that's just like, it's seemingly eternally compatible. It's Adobe's format, so I like that a lot. I love, and I've been a long time Pentax shooter, so actually probably the longest camera I've ever shot through all the cameras in all the years was the Pentax Q7 back when that came out, and I shot that for years and years and years and years. It went all over the world with me. Brilliant camera. I will one day review that because it's still in the box. And I would always shoot that in manual exposure mode, but then this little green button on the back, which is like a proprietary Pentax thing, you hit it and it automatically resets the settings to, like, if you just want to quickly, you're in manual autofocus or manual exposure mode, you see something, you want to shoot it really fast, you just hit that green button. If your settings weren't right, it will automatically dial in the settings for that scene. Then you can shoot it and it's not going to change anything after that because you're still in manual, but it's just like a reset. And it's just a really, really nice feature. I continue to love this about Pentax. It's on all of their bodies that I've ever shot. It has SD memory, and I just love that they thought about this. I mean, when you look at this body, the whole thing is basically, they've tucked the SD card in over here, and then they have the battery over here. So if, you know, for whatever reason you were shooting this on a tripod, you don't have to take it off the tripod. You can access both things here, and that basically fills up the entire body because it's just that small. Just a really smart design touch in my opinion. It has no anti-aliasing filter. I read that. I think that's true because the pictures are quite sharp. I feel like that's the one fact in all of this that I'm not 100% sure on, but it seems to me it has no anti-aliasing filter. And it has a hot shoe on the top, so you can add flash, you can add, it doesn't have like a mic input or anything like that, but you can add things to the top should you want or need. And then it has image stabilization. It's like pretty decent, and it really does offset, you know, these zooms, for example, are not the fastest zooms. This telephoto is actually kind of amazing. This is a 2.8 constant, but the standard zoom is 2.8 to 4.5. Not terrible, not like extra fast or anything, but the image stabilization does offset that. So I was actually out shooting in New Mexico in pretty low light conditions, and I would just keep the ISO down because I had image stabilization and I wasn't shooting anything in motion. I was just shooting a locked off shot, but I didn't need a tripod. I think they call it anti-shake reduction in Pentax language. So that's really nice. And then the RAW files themselves on this camera, really interesting, at least in Lightroom. I can't speak for the other image processors, but when I would pull the RAW files in from Lightroom, the color was really nice. Like, I call this like my sunset camera. It's like at night or just in that blue hour, that sunset hour, taking pictures with this, just importing RAW and just opening the RAW file, the pictures were the type of color that I really like. So I didn't feel like I had to do anything to them. However, getting to the cons of this camera, I really disliked all of the JPEG. I didn't really care for the black and white. I didn't really care for any of the color settings. I didn't go deep or hard into the color settings because I was just kind of turned off immediately, and I was like, I'd just rather shoot this in RAW, because when I opened the RAW files, I was like, I don't have to touch it. It looks great. So I just shoot this in RAW, and I kind of stopped shooting JPEG, but it does have RAW plus JPEG, which is really nice. It does kind of require two-hand operation because these buttons are so small. So I don't know. It's an ergonomic camera that still has some quirks, you know. Fly-by-wire focus, not a surprise, but still hate it. And it does tend to have on these lenses like a bit of chromatic aberration or purple fringing. That's another reason to shoot RAW, is you can correct that in post. I mean, you could on the JPEGs as well. You just have a bit more control with the RAW files. These toy lenses, the 3 and the 5, I think, the 4, wide and telephoto, like, I just honestly don't know why they exist. They don't even have much character to them. I thought maybe they would be like pinhole cameras or Holga effect or like something weird. But to be honest, they just look normal. They're actually really sharp. Like if you nail the focus, they're really sharp. That being said, I do really, really like the prime. The prime is pretty nice. The 47mm equivalent is just small. It's a good focal length. It definitely, all of these lenses have distortion and all that sort of stuff, but they have lens profiles in Lightroom. So you just put on the lens profile and it pretty much corrects everything. Okay, this might be I have 2 huge gripes with this camera. So the first one is it's old, and I'm pretty sure it's not just my camera because someone else commented to me that they had the same experience. But every time I turn it on, oh yeah, there it is. I get this like reformatting the date and time thing every single time. So that's like, then I have to like half press the shutter to get out of that, and then I can set it up. It's super annoying. And it's not just like every time I take the battery out, it's every time I turn the camera on. Usually like some of these older cameras, if you take the battery out, it will reset and then whatever. So what I end up doing is just leaving it on all the time. But as you can see, it's a very small battery to fit in this very small body. And this battery has such limited battery life. Like you would need a ton of these to get through a day of shooting. So that's kind of one of the big downfalls, in my opinion, to this camera, just from a shooting experience and enjoyability experience perspective. And then the other thing that drives me really crazy is there is no EVF or EVF option. It's not like the EPL1, which I reviewed from Olympus, where you have the option to add an EVF, an electronic EVF. I guess you could add, if you have the 47mm prime on it and you found some third-party optical viewfinder, you could use that. And while the autofocus is good, I would not trust it using an optical viewfinder on top, that it's nailing what I want it to nail. I've had other, even like the Ricoh GR3, I had the optical viewfinder on top because I just cannot stand shooting something without seeing it through my eye. And it just was not, I couldn't trust it. Like the autofocus is just not there, nor should it be. Like I should be directing the camera to point and shoot at the thing that I want it to shoot, focus wise. So that is a huge detraction for this system overall, because none of the Qs had the option for an EVF. And in terms of the LCD, the other thing I'll say, and I keep saying this for every review because it's true of old cameras, the LCD, while not bad, like it actually has a decent color range and dynamic range, but it makes everything look soft. So when I first started shooting this camera, I thought all of my pictures were like maybe out of focus. It was very confusing. So I just, it's pretty easy. You learn to just trust the camera. When I would actually download them, it's shocking how sharp the images actually are. And I assume that is because there's no anti-aliasing filter. And the lenses actually have really good micro contrast. I was really surprised by that, but it blows highlights very quickly. So definitely have to shoot this underexposed on your exposure comp to be able to preserve your highlights. I feel like there was another pro that I forgot. Okay, I remembered. It has focus peaking and focus magnification, which are very handy on this camera. Some other fun facts. So they did make a K mount adapter for like the regular Pentax line of lenses for any of the millions of cameras they produced from film to digital throughout the years. The 4.65 crop equivalent, if you put a 300 millimeter lens on here, for example, it would become a 1,380 millimeter equivalent due to that crop factor. So that's a really fun thing. If you're into telephoto or if you want to shoot the moon or something, I actually think a lot of people use this for astrophotography. Not because it's got low light capabilities, but just for that reach. There were cameras at this time that had Wi-Fi, I believe, but this is not one of them. You could use an iFi card if you wanted. And then apparently it has an intervalometer in it. I did not use that. It actually has a ton of features though. It's a very feature-packed camera. So at the end of the day, what do I think about this camera? Well, for me, this is a very complicated question because it is, no joke, the cutest thing I've ever shot. Like, I love the feel of it. It's not like the first Q where it's, I think, magnesium alloy or something. It's like a very sturdy build. This definitely is more plasticky. The later ones after the first were all built, I think, progressively less solidly, if you will. That being said, how cute, how good the grip is, how actually amazing the photos are. Like, I was very happy with most of the photos I took with this camera. But the fact that it has so many features and... Alright, my camera died at just literally the worst possible time when I was about to give passionate discourse as to my final conclusion on this camera. But what I was getting at there was the fact that you can shoot this camera in manual mode with these interchangeable lenses makes me want to shoot it like a proper camera, and I'm just not able to do that without an EVF and just a little, like one other button that would just give me a little more control instead of having to, you know, toggle on the button in the back to get aperture over shutter. It's just one step too many, and that EVF or lack thereof is honestly the final nail in the coffin for me. So sad because I've had this camera sitting in my closet for like more than 2 years, and I've really wanted to fall in love with it because it's so awesome in so many ways, and the final end result is actually really good. But I'm just going to come to peace with the fact that this is not the camera for me. So I will be letting it go, very tragically. So the camera also shut off without my knowing it, and so I drew the next camera and it was not caught on live TV, if you will. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what I drew and what I'll be shooting for the next 2 weeks. I will be shooting the Olympus Camedia C740. I got this camera for $10. It is an old school camera, very boxy, point and shoot, but I think I love it already. So looking forward to taking pictures. Follow me on Instagram at 1month2cameras if you want to see shots, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks. Bye.